Suzanne to connect. Hello, Suzanne. So, yeah, greetings, you guys. I will continue to admit people as they show up, but as of right now, it's just the three of us. So I encourage you even more than usual to feel free to jump in with interruptions and let me know what questions you have, because otherwise it's just going to be me talking the whole time. I think Suzanne really doesn't want us to see her. She wants us to see her keyboard.
Oh, no. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm trying. The problem is I try to see on my larger screen, on my secondary screen here. And so I flipped on I just gotta get used to doing it.
So you were moving your laptop out of the way.
Right. The laptop was in the way. That's it. Well, I missed your first chapter 1 of the Warblers, and I just reviewed the video. I just did it.
Oh, great.
30 minutes or 35 minutes looking at it and admiring it. So
well, that's excellent. Since, knowing the common warblers is very important if you're going to go out and look for the rarities, because most of what you're going to see is the common ones. And hello, Eve. Great to see you here too. Okay, well, let's see. I do have a brief announcement that on Saturday, we will be doing a group outing at the 8th Street footbridge in Carpinteria. So everyone if you're in Carpinteria, you're encouraged to come and join us with that. It'll be, again, 8 a.m. on Saturday, and it's not going to be a lot of walking. It's just going to be us on the bridge. But it is a really neat spot to birdwatch from because you're kind of up in the tree canopy. And I went there today at lunchtime, and there were some very cool birds there. So hopefully there will be cool birds there on Saturday as well. Does anyone else have any other fun birding they've done in the last month that they want to share about before we jump into the warbler talk? He shrugs.
It's one more thing.
Okay.
Sorry, I gotta do something about this computer. But I joined the Snowy Plover Docent team again at the Callender. I used to do that many years ago, and I started again. And they have so many banded birds there right now. And because all the ones which have been released this year, the captive reared, 33 of them. 33 were released, and many of them are still hanging around. And I like taking pictures of them and keeping track of that and sending them to Jessica and so. And one of the ones I found was actually a rescued bird, which was found as an egg in Carpinteria last year.
Oh, wow.
So it's one of your little rescued eggs made it, and it's doing well at Callender Report.
Wow, that is really fascinating. If you could maybe forward via email to me the information on that bird, because I'd love to add that to the write-up of the snowy plovers that I put on the Birdwatchers website.
Sure, I do. Yep.
Great. Yeah, that I guess I'd meant at some point to have a little just a bit of follow-up about what happened there at Carpinteria this summer. And I don't want to do it just off the cuff, so maybe I'll save that for the next meeting. But it's been very exciting. There was a lot of nesting activity down there, more so than the previous year. And so that's exciting.
That's exciting. Cool.
So the rescued egg, does that mean it's an egg they removed from the nest and raised it elsewhere?
Yes, elsewhere. I mean, it was rescued because of some reason. I mean, must have been abandoned, that egg, for some reason. Either the nest was flooded or the nest was covered by sand, or the parents left it. And so if these eggs get lucky, have been taken to the Santa Barbara Zoo, where they now have a program to incubate them and hatch those little snowy plovers and raise them until they're ready to be released. So, and so they come from way north, from Vandenberg, Oxnard, and Carpinteria. But I have the information where these banded birds come from. Jessica shared that with me. So it's really interesting. And so we have many of those little rescued birds now.
Yeah, that's great. And I know the people who volunteered down in Carpinteria for our little version of the docent program that we had there, they'll be excited to hear about that too, because we were all very invested in the the nesting that took place. And, you know, there was an initial success with some hit chicks that made it to fledging. And then there was a long string of, you know, birds that didn't make it. Even if they hatched, they were picked off by predators. So that was, you know.
Yeah, no, same problem here at Callender and Respawn. Yeah.
But that's great news. So I know that, so at least one additional bird succeeded in being reared off the snowy plovers at Carpinteria. So that's neat. Okay. Anything else people want to share before we talk about warblers? All right, going once, going twice. All right, we'll go on. We'll talk about warblers. And hello, Mary Jo. Great to see you too. So I'll mention again, I mentioned this at the beginning, we're pretty short-staffed. You know, the normal co-hosts are vacationing and not available. And it's a small meeting, and I'll just continue to admit people as I notice them coming in. But feel free to jump in and ask questions and, you know, be even more talkative than usual since there's, you know, a small crowd. It's just us. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead then and talk about the warblers, part 2, the warbler rarities. And for that, I will share my screen. Okay, so as I had already mentioned earlier, so last May we had warblers part 1, the common species, and we talked about 9 species of warblers then, the most common ones you can see in Santa Barbara County. In this meeting, we're going to talk about another dozen warblers that are more rare. And before I really get into talking about the warblers, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of rarities and trying to see rarities when you go birding. I know some of you are actively engaged in doing that because I see you out there chasing after the reported rarities. It's not something that all birders do. You know, it's not something I did for many years as I was, you know, becoming a bird watcher and considered myself, you know, a real bird watcher, but didn't bother chasing after rarities in any organized way. But I've done a lot of it in the last few years. So it's sort of an interesting topic to me, maybe again, because it's kind of new. But one question that people who do not do it might have is, why would you bother? Because it takes a lot of work. You know, a lot of times when you're chasing after rarities, it's not like you're just going out into the landscape and looking at all the many birds that are there. There's one specific bird that you've heard about that is there, and you're trying to go re-find it. You know, someone else has reported it, you know where it was, you would like to see it too. And it turns out, you know, looking for one specific bird in an entire landscape is quite challenging sometimes. You know, some birds are more chaseable than others. And a lot of times you go chasing after a bird. And again, chasing is sort of the technical term for trying to re-find a rarity that someone else has reported. There's chasing, and then there's finding. Finding is when you discover the rarity that you didn't know was there, and then you can share it with other people and they can chase it. Which is also a lot of fun, probably more fun. I've always felt that finding is more fun than chasing, but chasing is still pretty darn fun. And but a lot of the times when you chase, it does not succeed, you know, and you have to deal with that disappointment, or you have to, at least if you're me, you know, I remind myself, well, if I didn't have the failed chases, then the successful chases wouldn't feel so satisfying. You know, I have to have that sense of accomplishment that comes from the adversity of not finding them every time. But again, this raises this question, like, why would you bother doing it? You know, why is it worth that effort and that disappointment? And so I'll just share like one thing that makes it worth it for me and other people who are sort of in this same silly boat that I'm in, which is that eBird has made it very fun. They've sort of gamified it in web development terms. They've allowed you to keep score, and they basically, if you use eBird, you can go into any geographic area, a county, a state, a country, you know, the ABA area, whatever, and see a ranking of the top eBirders within that geographic area. And it can either be overall time, or it can be the current year, or it can be some other slice of time. And a lot of people, including myself, have sort of become hooked on this idea of the county year list rankings in eBird. it's just sort of a fun little, at least for me, your mileage may vary, but a fun sort of middle ground between just being super casual and just going out and seeing what birds are there and enjoying them for, for what they are, or the super engaged, North American big year competition where you're flying to different places all the time and you're trying to get 700 or 800 species. It's sort of, it's a fun little competition. It's a friendly competition. There aren't that many people competing, so it's, you have a chance. And you don't have to travel so much. I'm not really much of or have not at least historically been much of a traveler for birding purposes, but I like to bird around here. And this is an area that, if I'm focused on the boundaries of Santa Barbara County, I can chase rarities within Santa Barbara County at I can fit it into my schedule. And so it's a fun thing to do. And, yeah, Eve, I see you got your hand up.
Well, so John, is that the Santa Barbara County list for this year?
Yeah, as of like a
Wow.
week ago when I made the slide. I mean, it's a little different now.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, so you're a birder down in San Diego County, where I know from visits to San Diego County, you're more high powered down there. I think you have more people competing and you've just got more rarities down there. And so your
Ton of
numbers
people.
are bigger.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful though.
Yeah, so it's, it's fun. As I say, it's a friendly competition. There are birders who are not paying attention to this. In fact, some of the people on this list probably aren't paying much attention to it, which again makes it a little easier to compete against them if they don't realize they're in a race. But Steve Colwell, the current top of the rankings, has very much impressed me this year. He's a relatively new birder, but he is certainly raising the stakes of the competition. He's making it, it's been very hard to keep up. And in fact, I think at this point, he's got a very high probability of winning the annual competition because he's very good. Anyway, so I'm not going to talk about this a lot more, but just to say, this is one reason why you might be interested in seeking out and viewing rare birds, because the rarities are really how you differentiate yourself. All of the people in this top 10 ranking here have seen, most of the commonly seen birds in the county. So the difference really comes down to which of the rare ones they've managed to see. And again, just to kind of give you an idea of the level of obsession going on. So eBird doesn't show you everybody's list, but Steve and myself and David and Linda Blue have all pooled our lists with each other. And Steve has, helpfully created this Venn diagram so we can actually see who has which birds and which ones we have in common. Again, it's looking at it, right now, I realize, yeah, this is probably super interesting to about 4 people in the world and, sort of completely uninteresting to pretty much everyone else in the world. But I'm just it's just, it's a fun thing. We know, like, if a certain rarity pops up, like, oh, Steve already has that one, I can go see that bird and make up ground against Steve. Anyway, I'm going to move on. So I've talked before how the summer doldrums, the breeding season, there's not a lot of rarities showing up. Birds are pretty much on their breeding territories in the summer. They're doing their important work of rearing the next generation. But then the fall comes and they start moving around, and then the fall migration happens. And that's when you can start to get unusual birds showing up. And so this bird, I feel like this, the pectoral sandpiper, you can sort of make out in the lower right-hand part of this really awful photo. This was sort of the first fall rarity that I chased this year, and I was very excited to be able to see it. So I want to talk a little bit about if you decide to do this, you decide if you want to work on moving your rankings in eBird higher, or you want to just do it for the fun of it, just for the fun of finding these rare birds. How do you learn what's out there to be chased? How do you know when people see a bird? So I'm going to talk about ways you find out about them. One way is the mailing list, the SPCO birding listserv or email list. And this is sort of at this point, kind of an old school way to learn about rarities, to share rarity information. I guess back in the day, and like when I started birdwatching in the 70s and 80s, there were like a phone recording, right? You would call in to listen to the recording of what birds had been seen that week. But then the internet came along and email lists, and the SPCO birding list is basically a place you can sign up for it. And then if people see a rarity, hopefully they will send a message to the mailing list. And so if you monitor that mailing list, you will know when a rare bird has been sighted. And information about all of these resources are in the notes for this meeting. So either at carpbirdwatchers.org or on the description of the YouTube video where we're going to archive this meeting, you can get links to these things. So that's one way you can find out about rarities that have been seen recently. And then eBird alerts is another way that works really well. So what you can do there is you go to eBird, and if you've signed up with an eBird account, you can tell eBird, oh, I want to be emailed. For example, every time someone reports a bird in Santa Barbara County that I don't have on my Santa Barbara County year list. And if you're, especially enthusiastic, you tell, oh, I want hourly updates. So basically what it means is every hour eBird is going to send you an email if anyone has reported a bird in the past hour that you don't have on your county year list. And it'll give you a link to their eBird checklist, and hopefully they put information in there that lets you know where they saw the bird and you can go chase after it. And then one more thing that gets used for really good rarities, the really exciting rarities. There is this app called GroupMe, which is sort of a group messaging app. And a number of the enthusiastic birders in Santa Barbara County have created an SBA bird group text, basically. And for really good chaseable rarities, ones where there's going to be a lot of interest, they'll use that app. And if you want to, you can sign up to be part of that. If anybody's interested, send me an email and I'll, get you the information. You have to be invited, but, they're pretty open to inviting people if they are interested in participating in that. And it can be useful if there's, a bunch of people trying to see a really good rare bird. They can kind of coordinate in real time. They can be like, oh, I'm checking here and I don't see it. And someone's, oh, I just saw it over here. They can all sort of zip around and find where it is. And then another way, it turns out that if you, engage in birding as a social kind of activity, you will acquire birding friends and they will let you know. So this petrel sandpiper, as I say, I learned about it from an eBird alert, but I was a little under the weather for the last month or so, and was still recovering and taking a lot of naps in the middle of the day, and didn't want to do a long distance drive. And the idea of driving out to Lake Los Carneros seemed like a long distance to me. And I wasn't sure because the initial report in eBird, there was a photo, but it was even less clear than this photo. And I thought, that could be a misidentified least sandpiper. I'm not really sure it's a pectoral sandpiper. And I'm going to wait and see if anyone else reports it. So I took a nap, and I woke up from my nap and I got a phone call from David Blue, who's like, John, are you going to come try and check out this pectoral sandpiper? I said, oh, well, I'm not sure it's real. I was kind of waiting for someone else to confirm. He's like, oh yeah, it's real. We're there now. So I jumped in the car and I raced up there to see this bird. So I was really glad to have that phone call from David. Anyway, let's see. So yeah, to get more towards the topic of warblers, that's sort of just a general sort of discussion of fall rarities. But we talked in the last warbler meeting in May about the fact that there are a lot of, most of the warbler species in North America, the migratory warblers that you see north of Mexico, are in the east, and then in the boreal forest in the north where they're breeding. But a lot of the warbler action is in the eastern half of the country. We do have some species out in the west, but there's a bunch more species that are in the east and don't really get out to California in terms of their normal range. And so in the fall, this is sort of a generic warbler migration diagram. This isn't actually specific to any particular warbler species, but they do this migration where they're heading to the tropics where they winter. But occasionally, one will go the wrong way. And this is where you get this phenomenon of vagrancy, these vagrant birds that show up outside their normal range. And I don't know a lot about the science behind it. And in fact, the little I do know is that the science behind it is evolving pretty rapidly. They're getting new, technologies to get smaller and smaller trackers and be able to track smaller and smaller birds. So they're learning a lot about bird migration and vagrancy now that they couldn't learn about, decades ago. But again, I don't understand it, so I'm not really going to try and summarize it. Just as a practical matter, though, what will happen is you will often get, very small numbers of species that should be migrating like so, that just go in the wrong direction. And they're often first-year birds. So you're often going to see a bird in its immature plumage. So if you're looking in your field guide and you're trying to prepare yourself to go chasing after rarities, focus on the immature plumages because that's likely what you're going to see. And in general, with warblers in the fall migration, immature plumage is most of what you're going to see. You know, the adults they're outnumbered by the first year birds when they're on their southward migration because they've been up there and they've been breeding, and you know they raise 3 or 4 chicks per pair, and so when they come south, it's a lot of first year birds and a smaller number of adults. And even the adults have typically molted into their non-breeding plumage. So with a lot of warbler species, that's sort of a duller version of their breeding plumage. So in general, you know, the fall warblers can be challenging to identify for that reason alone, without even the extra challenge of there being these odd vagrants mixed in with the ones that you would normally see. So it all makes for an exciting time. And the places where you tend to find these vagrants are the so-called migrant traps. So these are like places with trees or other kind of good migrant habitat from a warbler's perspective, surrounded by less suitable habitat. So like desert oases are famously good spots to go find these vagrant warblers. Along the coastal plain where we are is also a really good place for vagrants. You know, again, a lot of times if you imagine a warbler that's typically migrating at night, it's going up there and it's flying along, and then, you know, dawn comes and it descends and finds a spot where it can recharge its batteries, rest, and feed before the next night's journey. Well, if they're flying in the wrong direction, they could end up out over the ocean. And then the sun comes up and they're like, oh, wow. And they're going to go for the nearest point of land they can find. The offshore islands off Southern California, or even off like the Farallones up in the Bay Area, are, again, famous sites for finding vagrant birds because they, you know, they find themselves migrating and they're out over the ocean and they just have to find a place to land. And so they'll go to the nearest island and you can find them that way. Or again, you could see them in these sort of coastal migrant traps like Carpinteria Creek, these places near the coast with big trees that are really good for fall vagrants. Okay, so we'll move on to warblers. So, but I've just been talking nonstop. Anything about that people have questions or comments about before we talk about the warblers specifically? All right, on we go. So these are the 9 common species that we talked about in the meeting back in May. And if you did not see that meeting, I encourage you to go watch it, or at least study up on these 9 species, because most of the warblers you're going to see during this fall migration are going to be from this group. So you need to sift through a lot of these in order to find the stray rarity. Again, these were mostly, I used their breeding plumages, their adult breeding plumages for these. And you should really check out in your field guide or eBird, or whatever resource you use. You should focus on the non-breeding plumages because that's what you're going to see. And again, the immature plumages, to the extent that they're different from the adults, that's what you should be expecting to see a lot of. Okay, so now we'll get into, I missed a page. I want to talk about this page. So here are the 12 species I'm going to go over in this meeting. And I'm going to go pretty quick through them and just kind of give you a quick exposure, like this is what they look like. You know, here's maybe a few tips for finding them. But again, typically, if you're seeing these in the fall, you know, the easiest way is that you're going to have someone else is going to report it, and then you're going to go to wherever they reported, and you're going to look for that bird. And if if it's an exciting rarity and you look for it quickly, because again, these birds have a half-life. You know, you get a report of a rarity at a certain spot, and the longer you wait to go look for it, your chances of successfully finding it go down because they move on. So if it's a really good bird and you go quickly, you may well find some other avid birders there looking for the same bird, which can be, both a fun kind of group experience and also kind of efficient, because you've got 10 sets of eyes looking for a bird. You've got a much better chance than if it's just you by yourself. So this kind of just shows you, what these 12 species are that we're going to talk about. Not all of these are vagrants. A few of them, like the McGillivray's warbler, we're actually in its normal range. It's just a little less numerous, and it's sort of a shy bird that hangs out in the underbrush. So I didn't include it in the 9 common species, but it is out there. But a lot of these other ones are legitimate vagrants, like they're birds where we are outside their normal range. But as you see, they do show up, and September, October is really the time for fall vagrant warblers. So that's the you know, you should clear out your calendar. I like guess the fall of 2018 is the first time I was really getting into doing this, and I had heard a report, I think, of a Blackpoll Warbler out at a little pocket park in Goleta, and I went out there to try and find it. And Nick Lethaby, who's a very locally renowned and very avid birder, he would probably be at the top of that ranking we were looking at if he chose to play that game, but he doesn't he chooses not to play that game. But he had reported it, and when I got there, he was there, which was exciting. And so he was able to help me out in finding it. And at one point we were looking for it and not seeing it. And I mentioned, oh, I've got to stop pretty soon. This was like on a weekday morning. I've got a dental appointment I have to go to. And he just looked at me and shook his head and said, John, why would you ever make an appointment in the fall, in the morning? Like, no, that's prime, prime fall vagrant birding time. So I took that lesson to heart. I try to not schedule dental appointments for the morning in the fall. Okay, so now we'll go on and we'll talk about these birds. So I used my own photos for these, and this is, I fully admit, this is a really horrible photo. But I used my own photos for a couple of reasons here. One is that the main reason is that it was a lot easier than trying to dig up, public domain or Creative Commons licensed photos that I could use and tracking down the attribution and all that. And the others, I thought, well, actually, it kind of conveys something about the rarity chasing experience. It's kind of like you're looking for Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. You don't get a lot of, good photograph opportunities. And this is the best photo I had of an ovenbird. But we will go ahead and I'll go ahead and click out to the eBird site so we can see what an ovenbird actually looks like with a better photo. It's really quite an attractive bird. Sort of has like a thrush kind of look to it, maybe a little bit like a hermit thrush or something like that. But you'll see, they have this bright white eye ring, this streaky breast, kind of an olive upper parts. If you get a good look at it, it's got this big orange crown stripe with black stripes on either side of it. Let's click through and look at some other examples. And it does have this thing where it kind of, it walks on the ground a lot, and it kind of cocks its tail up sort of in this kind of posture. So it's really very cute when you see it walking around. This is sort of a good habitat shot. I mean, every time I've seen one, this is what it was doing. It was basically in the leaf litter, kind of walking around on the ground. So that's where you should expect to see it. But it's a very cool warbler. If you look at its where would I want to do this? Let me go show you its actual range map at the All About Birds site. Again, you can see it really does not belong out here, and we only get small numbers of them each year. But they're very fun to see. All right, I'm going to move on to this next species, the northern water thrush, which again is kind of an unusual warbler. It's not really, they're also on the ground a lot. They like muddy creek beds. I think it's a really neat bird. It sort of pumps its tail as it's walking along. It sort of pumps its tail downward, and it actually blends in pretty well with the ground. So a lot of times the first thing that catches your eye is the movement of its tail pumping. I actually want to play what its call sounds like. Here's just some different views. Doesn't really have a lot of variety in terms of different plumages, but they all kind of look the same. And again, this is very much where you're going to see it, is this kind of habitat. There's been one that's wintered along Carpinteria Creek each of the last several winters. I think, Eve, you've seen that bird, right? You've gone down there and
yes, but it took me a lot of trips.
Yeah, they're shy. You got to be super quiet and just kind of wait for it to come out.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can hear it. I want to find let me find a chip call. The chip call is really distinctive. It's this kind of musical chip. It's really loud. Like you'll hear it down there by the creek when that bird is there. And it really sounds like nothing else that's down there. Okay. That's our northern water thrush. And in this species, the black and white warbler. So back in the May meeting, we talked about the black-throated gray warbler. And, you know, that's sort of the other warbler that we get around here that is sort of black and white in terms of its color pattern. But it's a very different, the specifics of where it's black and white are very different between those two species. So certainly acquaint yourself, if you're not already, with the black-throated gray warbler. But the black-throated gray warbler, as its name suggests, has sort of a gray back, and it has these black streaks along the sides. It has kind of a different sort of pattern of black and white on the head. But the black and white warbler has this real zebra stripe thing going on its upper parts, on the crown and the head and on back over the shoulders. It has its beak, if you get a good look at it, is a little bit down curved. So it's a, you know, sort of a pointy warbler type beak. But for a warbler, it's especially long, and again, it's sort of curved downward, which is not really typical of warblers. And behavior-wise, it's different. It likes to move along trunks and branches, probing in the bark, kind of like a nuthatch. So that makes it a pretty fun warbler to see, because, you know, most warblers are up there in the foliage, in the canopy, and it's hard to get a good look at them. But the black and white warbler, you've got a better shot, because it kind of will be down in the zone where, you know, closer to where the bird watcher's eyes are. I think it's just it's a very neat bird. I'm just going to keep on going. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on each of these. You know, again, I'm just trying to give you a basic exposure to them, so you have a chance when you're out there in the field of, you know, if you see a weird warbler, maybe one of these that we've talked about will pop into your head, and it'll start you on trying to figure out what it is. So here's another really awful photo, but again, the best photo that I have of a Tennessee warbler in terms of identification purposes. So let's definitely click through to eBird and see what they really look like. So this is a breeding plumage male, which you would not expect to see around here, because we're going to see them in their non-breeding plumage. Here's a female, which is a little closer to the way they look when we see them. And so this is more what I would think of as a typical Tennessee warbler that we might see. And, you know, at first glance, and in fact, when I have seen a Tennessee warbler, the few times I've seen one, the first thing I think is, oh, it's an orange-crowned warbler, you know, because it's kind of got that sort of drab, olive-colored kind of look. But if you look for a few key things, it'll help. It's got a little bit more of a stripy pattern on the head, the dark eye line with the light eyebrow over it. You know, that's really a bolder kind of look than an orange-crowned warbler is going to show you. So if you see that, that's a good thing to notice. Another thing that's really good, you can't see it so well in this photo, is the undertail coverts. So the area underneath the base of the tail are white, and sort of contrastingly white compared to the rest of the bird, which, you know, an orange-crowned warbler doesn't have that at all. It's just got the same olive shade all the way through the undertail coverts. So that's a good thing to look for. And then a really helpful thing that you know, I've learned to pay more attention to over time is just the overall proportions of the bird. The Tennessee warbler has a really short tail, and especially from the underside, which is the part of the bird you see a lot when you're looking up into the canopy at you know, warblers foraging up in the leaves. You see the bottom half of the bird, and if you look at the underside, this photo again doesn't show it, but the undertail coverts kind of come out all the way out to about here, and then the tail proper just extends from there. And that's a much shorter chunk of tail beyond the undertail coverts than, say, an orange-crowned warbler. An orange-crowned warbler has a lot more tail. Like the shape of that, if you think of sort of the shape of the little rectangle that extends from the end of the undertail coverts out to the end of the tail, with the Tennessee warbler, it's almost like a square. Right? And with an orange-crowned warbler, it's more like a longer rectangle. But at least that's how I think about it. We got any more? Yeah, immature. You know, again, these are. It's kind of funny. Like all these photos are the top part of the bird, which I feel like I rarely see when I'm out there in the field. I'm mostly looking up at it, and I see the underside of the bird. So check out your field guide. It should illustrate, you know, both top and bottom. Kind of see a little bit of that contrasting white undertail area there. Yeah, here you can kind of see, this is, you know, closer to what I would expect to see of it. Yeah, and again, kind of subtle, I mean, it really does pay to spend time out there, study the orange-crowned warblers that you see. When I was at the 8th Street Bridge today at lunchtime, there were a couple of orange-crowned warblers flying around. So I, took advantage. Like I want to have that common species firmly in my mind so that I have a better chance if a Tennessee warbler should happen across my field of view, I'll recognize that it's different. That's sort of an interesting look too. It says breeding male, which again, we're not going to see a breeding male, but that gives you an idea of what I was talking about with how short the tail is. Like this, from this point here to the tip of the tail is the measurement that I'm talking about. It's just like not a whole lot of tail there. Okay. Let us continue with this warbler. So the McGillivrays, and as I mentioned, we're actually in its range. It's not a vagrant if you see it around here. This is this one, adult male that's hung out at the Log Me In complex out in Western Toledo, where it's the Hollister Tech Park, I think it's called now. It's no longer Log Me In, but I still call it Log Me In. Suzanne, I think you've actually spent time out there like trying to photograph this bird. Like a lot of us spent time there because the other really cool rarities were in that same area. And while we were waiting to try and see the other cool rarities, this bird would pop out of the underbrush sometimes, pop out of the ivy for a second and let us get a look at it. And it's just a very cool bird. But, greenish olive for the most part with this big gray hood, these broken white eye arcs, fairly prominent ones. All of these are, good indications of a McGillivray's warbler. This is an adult male plumage. The females and immatures are similar, but just a lot more muted. Like, they have all pretty much those same characteristics, but it's all kind of low contrast. It's like if you're on a, computer screen or a TV screen, you turn the contrast way down, it gets much more muted looking. That's kind of the immature and the female look. In fact, we'll go look at a few photos because this is a bird you are typically going to see sometimes. So you want to get an idea of what it looks like. As I say, here's a female or immature. So, and this is a bird you could see, coming through here in the fall. So you should learn, what to look for. So again, those broken eye arcs are very helpful. The partial white eye ring where it's just the top and the bottom, but not in the middle there. And sort of, again, the gray hood and then this greenish elsewhere. These birds like to be down low in the, like in the ground cover. They like pop into view and then go back under the ivy or whatever they're in. So they, like a lot of warblers, it's hard to get a good look at them. A camera is really helpful for this kind of warbler study. Suzanne, I know you know this too. Like if you can get a photo, like I feel like this is for me, one of the main virtues of investing in a camera and learning how to use it is I can freeze this moment. I see the warbler for a split second. And if I can get a shot with the camera, then I can study it. I can actually go compare the bird to the field guide and really get a good look at it, rather than having to just recognize it really fast in my binoculars.
Yeah, that's what I do too. I can, without my camera, I would not be able to identify them. It's just, I'm still learning so much. Yeah, but this McGillivray warbler was so beautiful. Once in a while, you get a good shot.
Yeah, it really is a very pretty bird. I mean, this is one where, rarity chasing and keeping score, all of that aside, I would love to go see this bird just to see this bird because it's so cool looking. And again, here it gives you an example of sort of the habitat that you're going to see it in. It's going to be down low. There's going to be like tangled underbrush and stuff, and it'll pop into view and then disappear again. Okay, and then we've got, let me back up. Is that the next bird? Yes. The American Redstart, which again, I have only terrible photos of. But this is a really fun bird, and I want to give you a better idea of what it looks like. So let's go to eBird and take a look. So this is the adult male. Rare that you're going to see that, but you could see it. They do come through looking like this sometimes. More typically, here's a female. The immature looks kind of similar. Immature male. Okay, so here's another female. Yes, female doesn't really show up very well. Sort of a good shot of the tail pattern. So they do this thing where they like to spread their tails. They'll flit around through the foliage hunting insects, and they'll fan their tail out, and it looks just like this. And this pattern with the big yellow square patches, or in the male, orange square patches at the base of the tail, is a really good thing to look for. If you see that, you should be thinking, it's an American redstart. And there's another view of the male. Mature male with kind of a cool look. Let's see. They're just, I guess I'm interested in going and looking at the migration animation. I'd like to refamiliarize myself with what their actual range is, where are they normally seen. Okay, so here's their wintering grounds. And we'll put this in motion. We're up into the spring. Here they are breeding. And here they are in the fall. And you can see, in the fall, in our area, there's a little bit of, very avid birders. These are like single birds. Like there's a single bird and all the eBird users run out there to see it. You see in the fall, here it is again, just, a few little flecks of yellow, just a few individual birds showing up. But, for me, very much worth chasing after to try and see, because they're really cool looking warblers. And then this one, the Northern Parula, which again, we should see what it actually looks like, because my photos don't really do it justice. So one neat thing about it is this bicolored bill. So the lower half of its bill is yellow, and the upper part is kind of this dark gray or bluish gray. It's got these neat kind of bluish gray upper parts. Can't see it too well, but this kind of greenish back area. And then a yellow throat, which in the male with this really interesting kind of, I don't know, brownish chest band going across, a little bit of brown on the sides here too. See some other examples, because it's kind of variable. Here's, as I say, an immature bird. And I've seen a bird that looks like this, and it definitely had me confused for a while. I was like, what am I seeing here? I'm not sure what this is. But the wing bars, warblers tend to be, wing bars are a good thing to look for in a warbler, because they tend to, just like half the warblers have them and half the warblers don't. So you can, narrow down your search really quickly. So, okay, it's one with wing bars, so I can exclude all those other ones that don't have wing bars. But that sort of yellow on the throat and that little bit of the brownish coming through, and you can kind of see a little bit of the greenish on the shoulders. And that, a little bit of the bicolored bill. It's not really full on looking that way, because this is an immature bird. And here's a good look at what a female bird might look like. And there's an adult bird. Another look at a sort of an immature bird. And a singing male. And you should probably learn their songs. Like, not so much, I'm not sure if they're really vocalizing in the fall, but they do come through in the spring. If you remember when we looked at that histogram earlier, spring is actually a good time to see Northern Parulas around here, even more than the fall. And you do hear them singing then, and it's very helpful if you learn what that song is, because it's quite distinctive. There's that trill with that little emphatic chip at the end. Here's another example. So a little bit of a rising character to it. I guess a different kind of song, but a little bit of that same character to it. Okay. I could listen to Northern Parulas all day. But we will go on to this bird, the chestnut-sided warbler. Not a good photo. Again, out at that Log Me In complex. That Log Me In complex is a great place for warblers. They've got the Hollister Tech Park. It's out in Western Goleta. It's off Hollister. It's a big industrial park with an extensive parking area with lots of tipuana trees, lots and lots of tipuana trees. And then a big grove of eucalyptus too, which is where that McGillivray's warbler was hanging out. And just, it is a little magnet for rarities. There was one weekend last fall where there were, I think this may actually be from that time. There were like 5 or 6 different warblers in there, all of them tripping the rarity filters all at the same time. And it was just a really great weekend of birding in there. All right, let's see what it actually looks like. Well, there's a breeding adult male, which I have never seen. I would love to see. It's a beautiful bird. Breeding female. This is more what I would expect to see when I see them. It's got this very interesting kind of greenish color on top. This kind of unique kind of, I don't know, is that chartreuse? I don't know what color names are. It's like this sort of bright green, this kind of almost like lime, not lime, yellowish green, some sort of yellowish green color. Prominent wing bars, a white eye ring. Can't see it so well in this photo, but it has this prominent white eye ring. And sometimes, depending on, if it's a male, even in the non-breeding plumage, you will see the chestnut sides. And even in the ones that don't look this prominent, you can sometimes see a little hint of the chestnut going on there, which is a good clue. More breeding males. And again, it's up there in the foliage, moving around. A very cool bird, as are they all. All right, we'll go on to the Blackpoll Warbler. And again, a nice Bigfoot photo. This is actually a really good one to learn because it's kind of nondescript, but those wing bars really jump out at you. And they're definitely worth paying attention to when you see a bird like that. It's not one of the normal ones that we get around here. Whoops, did not mean to do that. Let me go back and go to eBird. Here we go. That's what I wanted to do. So the breeding male actually looks really different. And again, this is a bird I have never seen in this plumage. So I would love to see one. But this is more, breeding female. Yeah, this is more the kind of look that I have seen. Or like this. This is probably every Blackpoll Warbler I've seen has looked a lot like this bird. So prominent wing bars, kind of, that sort of basic drab olive kind of warbler color that a lot of these fall warblers seem to have. Dark eye line, this kind of streaking on the sides. It's variable. Some have more of it, some have less, but that's an important thing to look for. This is and there's actually another rarity that we sometimes get in the fall that I've not seen, but that can show up as a bay-breasted warbler, another East Coast species, that in an immature plumage looks a lot like this bird, like a lot like it. So this is one of those species where it's like, if I see one, if I'm standing next to Nick Letheby and he says, "Oh, that's a Blackpoll," okay, I'm like, okay, it's a Blackpoll. But if I'm seeing it on my own, and if it's a bird I've found, not one that I'm chasing, I definitely am going to want to get a photo just so I can really, focus in and say, okay, is this the bay-breasted or the Blackpoll? And what are these, these different characteristics it has, like the exact nature of the streaking on the sides is helpful. And, a lot of other characteristics I don't have memorized. So I really want to be able to study my references. This is kind of an occupational hazard to a person chasing after rarities. If you're not familiar with the bird from its normal range, you don't see a lot of examples of it. So you have pictures in a field guide or pictures in eBird, but in terms of actual, experience in the field, seeing the bird and getting really familiar with it, you're gonna have a really hard time identifying it. It brings home to me that the really accomplished birders that I've had the privilege of birding with, there are people who've been doing it for a very long time, or they're people who've traveled a lot, or both. And one of the main benefits of this travel is you can go to where Blackpoll warblers are common, and you can go out birding and see 100 of them or 200 of them and really get a good feel for what they look like. I've seen like 3 of them in my life, so I'm just not able to have the same easy familiarity with it. So I have to do more of that study, and that we talked in the better identifications meeting, the difference between recognition and identification. I'm very much in the identification phase. I have to really study the bird and tick off the field marks and compare it to the reference materials. Anyway, that's a Blackpoll Warbler. And this one was at the So they're in eBird as the police station tams, but this is the row of tamarisk trees that kind of run north and south along the west side of the Tea Time driving range. So right between the Carpinteria Sheriff's Substation and the City Hall along Carpinteria Avenue out by the bluffs. And then there's Tea Time. I'm gesturing like you know which way I'm facing in my imagination. But you know, if you're facing the ocean from Carpinteria Avenue out near the bluffs, you've got the Tea Time driving range, and then you've got the Carpinteria Bluffs on your left, and then you've got the City Hall on your right, and there's this north-south row of trees, including a bunch of tamarisks. Those are the police station tams. So if you bird out there, you got to be careful not to encroach on the driving range because you don't want people hitting golf balls at you. But sometimes in the fall, that can be a really good spot for migrants. They get trapped there because they can't go any further because there's an ocean in the way, and they hang out in those trees while they wait for their chance to continue. Alrighty, palm warbler. So this is one of the easier vagrants to get, I feel like. You know, we get, you know, a handful of them reported probably every fall, whereas some of the, and they seem to hang out for a while in some cases. So, you know, they're a little more chaseable. They like to, and they feed and forage on the ground a lot. Like they'll be up in a tree, but they'll also fly down. They like lawns, you know, they kind of open grassy areas. They're out where you can see them, is my limited experience with palm warblers. You know, they look kind of, at first glance, to my eye, a lot like an immature plumage yellow-rumped warbler. I mean, they're kind of brownish, they're kind of big for a warbler. Sometimes you see them associating with yellow-rumped warblers. But there's some key differences. You know, the face pattern is different. They've got that dark eye line and the light eye row over it. Depending on what plumage you're seeing, they can have actually a real brownish crown that really stands out. And instead of having a yellow rump like a yellow-rumped warbler, they have yellow on the undertail coverts. So sort of the opposite, that's flipped. And they pump their tail a lot. Also, they do this thing with their tail as they're walking around where the tail is like dipping downward. But let's go see some actual better photos. So again, breeding adult, more of a typical look. Like, you know, this is the version of the bird that I am familiar with seeing. You know, so again, kind of brownish, kind of a big, heavy beak for a warbler. You know, again, it's a dark eye line with a light eyebrow, and then you can see a little bit of the yellow, and actually has a little yellow on top too. So I didn't mean to mislead you by saying, oh, it's yellow on the bottom, not on the top. There's a little yellow on the top too, but extra yellow underneath. And again, if you see it, it's going to be doing that tail thing probably, and that's a really good giveaway that you should be thinking palm warbler when you see that. And again, this is the version of this bird that I've seen the most. It looks pretty much just like this. Alrighty, are we almost there? We are almost there. Oh, Canada warbler. Okay, so there was one or two of these also at the Logmein complex, but I used this photo because a little bit better photo at this different place, the Riviera Business Park, which again, you know, if you were chasing warblers last fall in Santa Barbara County, you probably spent some quality time there because there were some really cool birds there. Let's see what it really looks like in eBird. So the adult male is gorgeous. I have never seen this bird. This is more, you know, the version of it that I see. And this actually looks a lot like the versions of this bird I've seen. So yellow underneath, grayish on top, prominent white eye ring. And then, you know, with the yellow throat, but then this little necklace pattern, these kind of, and it's variable. Some individuals have more than others. But again, in the adult male, it's really obvious. And you know, it's up there foraging in the foliage. But it's a very cool bird. I've enjoyed seeing it the times I have managed to see one. And then this is the last one I want to talk about, the painted redstart. And we've had one of these winter in one or two of them wintering around Santa Barbara. In fact, one wintered in Carpinteria a few years ago. We got it on the Christmas count, which is very exciting. But it looks just like this. Refreshingly, it doesn't have like, you know, drab immature plumages to do it. They basically all just look like this in my limited experience. but they're really pretty looking birds. And here we'll go see some better photos of them because they really do deserve it. They do a thing where, again, this is another Redstart. So like the American Redstart, they do like to fan their tail. Oh, well, okay. Turns out I was wrong. They have a juvenile plumage that looks like this, which I've never seen. But this is the version of this bird that I've seen. And if you know, this one, what was it, at Rocky Nook Park, right, last fall, and it hung out there for a long time. In fact, I think I got this bird on my current year list because it stayed into January. So on January 1st or 2nd, I was there trying to get this bird because I wanted to make sure that I got it on my year list. I was being very strategic. I wanted to get all the rarities I could right away. The common stuff I could get later. I really wanted this bird. And that is it. Those are our 12 birds that I talked about. And, you know, there are another half dozen or so that, you know, can show up. I mean, they're rare, but if you sign up for those eBird alerts and, you know, keep your eye on the SPCO birding email list, you will learn about them. And, you know, again, it's not, to me, it seems very worthwhile to, you know, jump in my car and drive off for 2 hours before work and just try and, can I find this one individual bird? I'll stand around in a, you know, a business parking lot as people are going to their jobs, and I'm there with my camera and my binoculars saying, oh, hi, how's it going? I'm just looking at birds. To me, that feels like a very satisfying thing to do with my time, but not for everybody. And certainly there are many ways to enjoy birds and birding that don't require you to do that. You know, I want to emphasize that. But you know, if it seems at all intriguing and you haven't done it, I encourage you to give it a try. You might like it, or you might decide like, yeah, no, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to waste my time doing this. But that's it. So feedback, comments, questions. Paul, yeah, got your hand up.
Tell you how insect or fruits, or what do they mostly feed on? Warblers, or are they just a variety of all?
So and I talked about this more back in the May meeting. So if you want to go back and watch that meeting, you know, you can get your fill of me spouting off about this topic. But mostly they're insectivores, you know, and that's kind of why they have this highly migratory lifestyle. You know, the ones that we see in North America, at least there's a bunch more warblers that live down in the tropics that aren't very migratory. They have insects year round down there, and there's other ones down there that eat fruit and they kind of do their thing. But the ones that we get migrating up into North America typically are focused on insects. There's a few species that will supplement that with fruit. The yellow-rumped warbler is an example. And those are the ones that tend to winter further north because they have access to other, you know, food resources besides insects for those colder months. So if you know, look in your field guide at those range maps, you can kind of tell the ones that just disappear from North America, they're probably exclusively insectivores. And then the ones that do kind of hang out, you know, are maybe eating other kinds of things as well. So are any of you planning on coming to the thing on Saturday? Cool. Well, I will see you there. Yeah, and again, this is going to be a pretty low-key outing. You know, we're going to go stand on this footbridge for 45 minutes or an hour, however long, you know, it remains interesting to us. But it's a neat spot, and it's kind of it's like going to the circus where you've got, you know, you can be looking upstream from the bridge, and if you know, get bored, you just turn around and look downstream, and there's a whole different set of birds down there. And you know, again, going there in the morning ought to be helpful. You know, I enjoyed myself there for a solid 20 minutes of birding and saw lots of birds in the middle of the day. So I would assume at 8 o'clock, it's going to be a lot better. You know, more vocalizing, more activity. Okay, well, if that's all that people want to chat about, we will wrap things up. Thank you very much for showing up. I was thinking that, you know, at about 8:28, no one had shown up, and I didn't have my usual helpers who were there to, you know, gossip about birds for the 10 minutes before the meeting starts. So I was feeling like, oh boy, I hope people show up. So I'm glad you showed up.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you out there. And again, if you get into the rarity chasing, you'll see me at the rarities, because that's where you know, we all hang out and chat while we're waiting for the bird to show up. You know, we'll compare notes about the last thing we chased and whether we succeeded or not.
Good. Thanks,
Right.
John.